Good morning. Welcome to my channel. My name is Dr. Rachel Tapman, and this YouTube channel is for anybody who cares about language technology and other people. And today's stream is going to be a little bit different than something we've done on my channel. Those of you who know me from Kaggle or Raza might have joined me on one of those streams before, but we're going to be reading a paper. Rina, I hope you enjoy it. Yeah, good to see you, Nato. And full disclosure, I have not read this paper before. I skimmed it and was like, this looks relevant because we had a request last week to talk about summarization, automatic summarization research. And just to give you a little bit of background, if you're unfamiliar with this topic or research task, it is the task in natural language processing of taking a long document and turning it into a shorter document that still maintains the most important and useful pieces of information from the longer document. And we will get into it a lot today. So let's hop right in. So this paper, this is published, this is not a preprint, and it is from NAACL 2022, so that happened July, so just a couple months ago. It's a pretty recent paper. I wanted something that would cover sort of more recent work. And the other thing that really drew me to this paper is, as many of you know, I was a researcher at one point, but I've been working in the industry for, I don't know, coming up on 7-8 years now, and I got into research in the first place for a very practical ends. So I care about language technology in as far as it makes people's lives better and not worse, as you might guess from the channel tagline. And I think this sort of very hands-on approach to incorporating users and just sort of figuring out, you know, is this summarization good? Is this, you know, is this useful? Did we do a good job? So setting aside, you know, blue or whatever metric you're trying to use for this, did you accomplish the thing in a way that is helpful for users? So that really appealed to me as a way of thinking about these problems. And I do not speak Dutch, and I know enough linguistics to know that my vowels will be wrong here, but I'm going to give it my best shot. So this paper is by Maartje de Rijke, apologies again, Julia Kiseleva. If anyone has the IPA for these, please pop it in the chat and I will correct it. And Maarten, ooh, that's definitely the wrong vowel there. De Rijke. So again, apologies for any mispronunciations. And was joint work between the University of Amsterdam and Microsoft Research. And I think Julie is actually based in Seattle or Redmond, I guess. So let's hop in. Abstract, automatic text, woo, strong start. Little sip of water. Automatic text summarization has enjoyed great progress over the years and is used in numerous applications impacting the lives of many. Despite this development, there is little research that meaningfully investigates how the current research focus on automatic summarization aligns with users' needs. Yes, a great question. Perhaps the first one that I would ask as someone working mainly in industry. To bridge this gap, we propose a survey methodology that can be used to investigate the needs of users of automatically generated summaries. Importantly, these needs are dependent on the target group. Hence, we design our survey in such a way that it can be easily adjusted to investigate different user groups. In this work, we focus on university students who make extensive use of summaries during their studies, and also are I would say a population of convenience for university researchers. We find that the current research directions of the automatic summarization community do not fully align with students' needs. Oh no. Motivated by our findings, we present ways to mitigate this mismatch in future research on automatic summarization. We propose research directions that impact the design, the development, and the evaluation of automatically generated summaries. So just to sort of recap what we're going to talk about today. First of all, there's insufficient evidence that the sort of automated measures of summarization that get used commonly are actually a good measure of the utility of the summarization. And you can imagine, I imagine all of you have had to read something long at some point and been like, man, I wish this were shorter. I just need the top level points. For example, the abstract of a research paper gives you a good idea of what they're going to talk about in the research paper. And it could save folks a lot of time if it is accurate and usable and meets their needs. And it sounds like the main contribution is, I'm pretty sure the word I'm looking for here, the main contribution of this paper is this survey methodology that should be portable, right? So you can take the survey and use it in your own work if you are working on summarization. And let's say you need to prove to your boss you did a good job and that users are enjoying it, you can use this survey instrument in your work. And then also, looking to see if it worked, if it was feasible. Feasibility? Applied? There's a specific word I'm reaching for, and it's tip of the tonguing me, and I don't know what the word is, but I know there is one. So does it work, and does it work with this specific group? And oh, whoopsie, it looks like some of the methods that are currently being used aren't working super well for this particular group of users. And I'm gonna go out on a little limb and say that everyone who is watching has been a student at some point in their life. And if you haven't, my apologies for making assumptions about you. But as students, condensed information can be very, very valuable. And I imagine that they are probably not the largest group of users of automatically summarized text, but a very important and impactful one. All right, so let's get to the introduction and sort of the review of previous work. And I think this is sort of the question that I had last week was about the field of automatic text summarization has experienced great progress over the last years. Wow. Especially since the rise of neural sequence-to-sequence models. So sequence-to-sequence modeling, seek-to-seek, was originally a specific model proposed by Google Research. It has since been applied more generally to the class of tasks of taking in a string of text and producing a string of text. So that would be summarization, machine translation, maybe even depending on how you structure the task, potentially even conversation, dialogue stuff. So very common to want to put out a sequence of text in response to an input sequence. And of course, Vaswani is the transformer paper. The introduction of self-supervised transformer language models like BERT, Devlin, has given the field an additional boost. So these are all going to be transformer papers in automatic summarization, which is not an area I've read a whole ton in. I've read like a little bit. I'm sort of familiar with the field, but it's not one of my main research areas. So keep that in mind as you're reading this. The often implicit goal of automatic text summarization is to generate a condensed textual version of the input document while preserving the main message. So they're saying here, this is what people want to do. They don't often actually say out loud that that's what they're trying to do. This is reflected in today's most common evaluation metrics for the task. They focus on aspects such as informativeness, fluency, succinctness, and factuality. I'm not entirely sure what informativeness is as a metric or how you would measure it. Fluency generally means, does this look like a human wrote it? So language models in particular are very good at fluent text. Succinctness, is it short? And then factuality, is it correct? So I'm guessing that informativeness is, I've definitely read papers with this as a measure in them in the past. It's just early. Did you get all of the relevant information? So between factuality and informativeness, it would be like precision versus recall in precision versus recall. Yes, that sounds right. That feels like the right mapping to me in statistics. And I know I'm going to be a little bit on the paper here. Yeah. Oh, good. I'm glad you like it, Mert. And AM, fabulous. I'm glad you could make it as well. Welcome, welcome. Hey, Hector. Oh, can I move that? Yes, I'm going to move me. Whee! Now I'm on this side. So we have a little bit of a figure here that I'm sure we'll get to in the text, but let's look at the figure first, because I think that sometimes that can help to ground the text a little bit. So the top figure is most current automatic text summarization techniques, left input document, right summary. So here you have the document. This figure shows the classical approach for text summarization. Unstructured textual input is transformed into shorter textual output. Unstructured here meaning that there are no further data structures on top of it. Like there's no tagging, there's nothing that's computer readable. It doesn't mean that the text itself does not have internal structure. And then something happens in the middle. And then the output here would be the usual approach for textual summarization uses unstructured textual input and output. So you can see some information has been removed for the main sort of gist of the text has stayed. And then this is the approach that the authors are going to be proposing here, incorporating context factors. For a useful summary, we take users' wishes into account and might have a more structured input and output. So like adding labels or adding additional data, or maybe some sort of like intermediate task, or like additional tags perhaps on the output. Like, I'm pretty sure this is what you want, or something like that. And then the output would be like awareness of users' wishes, little arrow, more useful summary. So this is sort of the difference between the current approach on the, the approach proposed in this paper on the bottom and the current approach on the top, which, I don't know. Those of you who watch my channel a lot know that I really care about users and the people who are using the technology. So I think this, you know, whenever there's more input from users in the loop, I'm always happy about it. Even if, you know, it is much more expensive and time consuming, because generally you end up with something that's more actually useful at the end. All right. Oh, right. And here we're talking about different metrics. The needs of the users of the summaries are often not explicitly addressed, despite their importance in explicit definitions of the goal of automatic summarization. Manny defines, or Mani perhaps, I'm sorry, I don't know how that's said either, to take an information source, extract content from it, and present the most important content to the user in a condensed form and in a manner sensitive to the user's or application's needs. So you can see in this sort of explicit means they actually said it. In this definition, it includes the users and what they need, but that's not actually necessarily always included in the task itself. Yeah. Am says, I think the second approach maps to query-focused summarization. Interesting. I'm not familiar with that at all. I'm not familiar with that approach, but they may talk about it a little bit further down. Different user groups have different needs. Investigating these needs explicitly is critical, given the impact of automatic information transfer. Nope, adequate information transfer. We propose a survey methodology to investigate these needs. In designing the survey, we take stock of past work by Spark Jones, who argues that in order to generate useful summaries, one should take the context of a summary into account, a statement that has been echoed by others. To do this in a structured manner, Spark. I'm just going to say Spark if that's incorrect, and some of you know how it's said. Again, please correct me. Introduces three context factor classes: input factor, purpose factor, and output factors, which respectively describe the input material. Okay, so the text you're trying to summarize, the purpose of the summary, why are you summarizing it, and what the summary should look like. So I guess this would be like, do you just want raw text? Do you want like bullet points or something like that? We structure our survey and its implications around these factors. In figure 1, we give an example of incorporating the context factors in the design of automatic summarization methods. So they're going to be adding all three of these factors in the summarization process itself. Yeah, the approach with user input. So Am is just continuing to provide more information. There's a word for that. Sorry, I'm having some lexical access issues today. Also, I'm sorry, I just want to pop down and look at this paper. Oh, that's not a hyperlink. Interesting. I wonder if that's an Edge thing. It was Bennett, right? Also, I know this looks super duper long. There are a lot of appendices, so it's actually only 54 pages. It's only 54 pages. But I don't think it starts at page 1. I'm pretty sure it starts at page 46. So that's what, 8 pages, which is a long paper is usually 8 pages. And the reason it doesn't start as 1 is because this is part of the, it's part of the proceedings, which means that it's all the papers in one document, even though you split it up into separate PDFs. For publishing purposes, this is like a specific journal. Sorry, I was just looking up that Bennett paper because I feel like I've read it and I could use a little, I I have not, actually. I don't think so. So this is Paul Bennett et al. From 2012 at SIGIR, so Special Information Group on Information Retrieval. I'm pretty sure, yeah, information retrieval in Portland, modeling the impact of short and long-term behavior on search personalization. Interesting. Okay. I don't know that paper. Back to the top. Scroll, 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 scroll. There we go. All right. I'm gonna move myself back. I might end up moving myself around quite a lot today. Our proposed survey can be flexibly adjusted to different user groups. Here, we turn our focus to university students as the first stakeholder group. So stakeholders are just people who care about the model, basically. It's a very broad way of saying it. University students are a particularly relevant group to focus on first, as they benefit from using pre-made summaries in a range of study activities. But the desired characteristic of these pre-made summaries has not been extensively investigated. We use the word pre-made to differentiate such summaries from the ones that users write themselves. Automatically generated summaries fall in the pre-made category and should thus have the characteristics that users wish for pre-made summaries. Okay, so they're saying that this is different from the situation where a student is summarizing something, for, I guess, as part of coursework for like a book review or something, or if they're doing it as like part of their study or literature review. So if you're writing a paper, the section that we're in now, where we're talking about sort of all of the other papers that are relevant and what they say, is the literature review section, and you would summarize in that, right? Like all of these little snippets about what's in the papers or brief summaries of those papers. Or where you would go for more information. Motivated by our findings, we propose important future research directions that directly impact the design, development, and evaluation of automatically generated summaries. We contribute the following. Love this. This is great as a reviewer, but a little pro tip for y'all. If you are submitting a paper to a conference, if you can explicitly say, here's our contributions, and like pull them out and be like, here's a section that I talk about each in, great. If I have to dig for that, I'm not going to say I'm just going to like outright give you a bad review for it, but it is a huge pain. It suggests to me that you are not super clear about what your contributions are. And if you don't know what the contributions of your paper is, then why should it be shared with your peers? You know what I mean? So 10 out of 10. Great feature. I'd recommend this. You can tell these are some experienced scholars. All right. Make sure I'm actually seeing everybody in chat. Hey, old player. Yes, I am juking back and forth a little bit today. Can I make this smaller so I can actually see stuff? Go away. It's mildly better. Okay. Contribution 1. We design a survey that can be easily adapted and reused to investigate and understand the needs of the wide community of users of automatically generated summaries. So those of y'all who are working on stuff like this for work, you can just yoink it, cite it, be like, hey, this is where we got our test instrument. We don't have to do it ourselves. Survey design is super hard. I don't know if any of you have ever had to design surveys, but it is. It's very easy to write a bad survey. And I think most folks that have not had any interactions with survey design previously don't realize that, and often you write quite a few stinkers before you sort of learn the ropes and develop a nose for the methods. Oh, no worries, Norm. Thank you. I appreciate you tuning in. Contribution 2, we develop a thorough understanding of how automatic summarization can optimally benefit users in the educational domain, which leads us to unravel important and currently underexposed research directions for automatic summarization. Yes, research in context. We are not doing things in a vacuum, y'all. There are people out there who would like this thing, and we should think about them. That's my hot take. Also, apologies if you can hear my dog. We propose a new feasible and comprehensive evaluation methodology to explicitly evaluate the usefulness of a generated summary for its intended purpose. Great, because there's a, so if you remember the sort of 4 factors that were talked about previously as the, metrics, so informativeness, fluency, succinctness, and factuality, none of these are like saliency or relevance for the task, right? None of these are, did it do a good job doing the specific thing that a user needed? They're all sort of qualities of the text. So this is going to provide additional information for you to evaluate that. Be great. I'm excited to keep reading. CTACMO, apologies if I'm saying that wrong. I work in a survey company. This presentation for me as a survey statistician is weird. Yeah, I think this might be relevant. You might have some feedback for the authors. All right. In section 1, we introduce the context factors as proposed by Spark Jones, which is basically the input, the output, and then what the user wanted. Each context factor class can be divided into more fine-grained subclasses. To ensure the flow of the paper, we list an overview in Appendix A. Nice. So basically they're saying, like, we could list them here. You can check them in the appendix if you want. We're not gonna like take up a bunch of papers and like derail your train of thought going through all of these, you know, fine-grained distinctions. Below, we explain and use the context factors in their fine-grained subclasses to structure the related work. As our findings have implications for the evaluation of automatic summarization, we also discuss evaluation methods. Lastly, we discuss the use cases of automatic summaries in the educational domain. Fabulous. We're going to get even more review, which is part of the reason why I picked this paper, is because I think it's going to have a lot of review of relevant work. Also, so far, it's been excellently written. I would give the sort of clarity and informativeness a high score. So it's just something I wanted to pick out for a second for those of you who are not working in NLP or NLG, evaluating particularly sequence-to-sequence methods and anything where there's generation of text as part of the output is sort of notoriously difficult. A lot of folks will use some sort of numeric proxies that it's a measure. You can make number go up. Does it actually make the thing that you're doing better? Open question. So this is very much a sort of ongoing field-wide discussion about what constitutes good evaluation of generated text. Has that stopped us from doing massive text generation projects? Sure ain't. Do we know if they're good? That's second question. That's a different thing. All right, automatic text summarization, input factors. We start with the fine-grained input factor unit, which describes how many sources are to be summarized at once, and the factor scale, which describes the length of the input data. Okay, so is this summarizing like a bunch of papers? Is it summarizing a comment on a YouTube video? Probably you wouldn't want summarization for that. They're usually pretty short. And you know, how long are those inputs? So is it like 5 novels, or is it 2 short papers, where the novel would be longer than the short paper? Short papers are 4 pages. These factors are related to the difference between single and multi-document summarization. A lot of citations, if any of you are interested in finding out more work. Scale plays an important role when material shorter than a single document is summarized, such as sentence summarization. I did not know that that was a task, but some of you may know that I have, my undergraduate is in linguistics and English literature, and I took a lot of coursework in Victorian literature. And in that context, sentence summarization sounds like a great idea and very helpful. Regarding the genre, I can also see this for like simplification purposes, like text simplification for things like writing for children or a lower grade level, or you know, non-native speakers of a given language. So I just didn't know it was a task. Today I learned. Norm says, I'm trying to catch up, very new to this entire topic, starting to get it. Oh, fabulous. I think this is a great paper to help with that. I wonder if that's Maria Lapata. It probably is. Anyway, sorry. Sometimes you just see a last name and you're like, I wonder if that is the person that I think it is. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. Regarding the genre of the input material, most current work focuses on the news domain or Wikipedia. A couple reasons for this. A, there's a big commercial desire for news summarization. It's something that people tend to find very useful. And also, you know, there's so much happening that there's a lot of news about it. So if you're trying to understand a wide variety of things, having each of those things discussed in a short way can sometimes give you broader reach. Although, I mean, obviously you use nuance. Why do people use Wikipedia? Well, Wikipedia has very permissive data licensing, so you can do a lot of stuff with the data, and it's free, which news text isn't always. Yeah. Brett says, thou hast had the skills. Oh, thank you. And then AM clarifies, sentence summarization is a task, and at a higher scale, so is long document summarization using e.g. long former. I think Brett might have been talking to Sitakmo there. A smaller body of work addresses different input genres, such as scientific articles. If you are working in a field with a strong ethos of open science and publishing open access, this can be fine. If you are working in a field with a strong tradition of making you pay for it and very litigious companies, less fine. Basically, does SLVA have a stranglehold on the field you're trying to work in or not? Forum data, that's like internet online forums, opinions, and or dialogues. These differences are also closely related to the input factor's subject type, which describes the difficulty level of the input material. So I'm guessing that something like scientific articles would be considered more difficult than something like let's say simplified English Wikipedia, simple English, plain. The Wikipedia that is in English but has been simplified would I imagine usually be considered less difficult than most scientific articles, I would guess. Yeah. The factor medium refers to the input language. Most automatic summarization work is concerned with English as language input, although there are exceptions. NLP today, am I right? Such as Chinese or multilingual input. It's interesting. So there's a lot of NLP work on Chinese. A lot of it is published in Chinese, and I do not read Chinese, so I'm not super up on it unless it has also been published in English. The last input factor is structure. Especially in recent neural approaches, explicit structure of the input text is often ignored, so you just treat it like a big long string. Exceptions include graph-based approaches, where implicit document structure is used to summarize a document, and summarization of tabular data or screenplays. The structure in screenplay is that some of the text is, descriptions of the scene, some of the text is directions to the actors, some of the text is words that the actors are saying, so it's all, they're different types of chunks. Screenplays are also very formalized in how they're written, so even if you're doing like OCR, you could probably get a lot of that structure out and not just a big string of text. Purpose factors. Although identified as the most important context factors by Spark Jones and followed by, for example, Manny, again, apologize if I'm saying any of these names wrong, purpose factors do not receive a substantial amount of attention. There are some exceptions, e.g. query-based summarization. Oh, right, so this is what AM was talking about, so some citations for that if any of you are interested. Question-driven summarization, personalized summarization, and interactive summarization. I have no idea. I don't really know what the difference between query-based summarization and question-driven summarization is. My guess is that query-based, you would do like a query to retrieve some sort of data, and question-based would be more of a question answering sort of thing. Personalized summarization is obviously going to be personalized to the user. And interactive summarization, I'm guessing, is, you're asking questions or you're like clicking and being like, this is helpful or this is not helpful, and it's being redone. I'm just guessing. I haven't actually read a lot in these fields. They take the situation and audience into account. The use cases in the generated summaries are also clearer in these approaches because you're trying to do something more specific than just, you're trying to do, oh my gosh. Mouse skills. You're trying to do something more specific than just generate text output. You're trying to, personalize it. So you have both, did you do the text output good? And also, is it useful for this particular user? All right, so those are the input factors and the purpose factors. Input factors, again, being about the text that you are trying to summarize. Purpose factors about why you are doing it. And the sort of point that they're making here is that these purpose factors have not really been investigated to the same degree as the input factors, or I imagine, based on the length of this, the output factors. Oh, sorry, I missed some chats. Oh yeah, I replied to you on Twitter, Norm. Query is a smaller question, isn't it? Or more strictly defined, perhaps? I don't think you have to write a query as a question. So Oh, I talked about this, I think, in my top 10 favorite language technologies. We talked about natural language search. So you definitely can write a search query as a question. I don't think it has to be. I think there was a point in time where technologists thought that is how people would interact with search engines, like Ask Jeeves, if you remember that. So Ask Jeeves was like the first big natural language search engine. And at the time, it was very fancy. I remember as a kid being like, oh, I'm just gonna ask questions. I don't have to like remember keywords or booleans or do any of the like librarian stuff. Yeah, but again, I'm not super familiar with the difference between those tasks. Yeah. AM says, a query is keywords, a question is a natural language. A question in natural language implies a need of natural language understanding. Okay, very helpful. Okay, so a query would be with those keywords. Interesting. Normalize it. I assumed it was basically a request for information. Yeah, so this is one of the things that's tricky about scientific literature, is that there may be a term that is used in one way in sort of like general speech, right? But in a scientific domain, it is used in a different way, right? So domain is a great example there. I think if I just say like domain, you probably think of like websites. But if I say domain in NLP or, sociological setting, what I mean is like a specific sort of topic and style of speech use, like a research papers are a domain. Yeah, which is can be one of the things that is particularly challenging about reading scientific literature, is misinterpreting some of the words. Yep. All right, and then the output factors. We start with the output factors style and material. The latter is concerned with the degree of coverage of the summary. Most generated summaries have an informative style and cover most of the input material. There are exceptions, e.g. the XSum dataset, which constructs summaries of a single sentence and is therefore more indicative in terms of style, and inevitably less of the input material is covered. I'm not entirely sure what an indicative style is. Informative is obviously like I'm giving you information. I guess indicative would be more like here's what's in it and not I'm going to tell you about it, maybe. I don't know. I'm not familiar with the style term. Not many summaries have a critical or aggregative style. Okay, yes. So critical would be like, here is, like we are sort of reading this paper critically, right? Like I'm reading it and then I'm providing additional information or context or being like, oh, I think this bit's good, or there hasn't been a bit yet that I think is particularly bad, but like that would be something that I might bring up. And then aggregative would be like bringing different things together. Oh, here we go. Oh, we're going to get a little bit of explanation here. Aggregative summaries put different source texts in relation to each other to give a topic overview. So I guess what we're reading right now, the sort of literature review, would be an example of an aggregative summary of all of the papers that are being discussed here. Most popular summarization techniques focus on a running format. Work on template-based and faceted summarization follows a more headed, structured format. Okay, so I think what they're saying here is this is generated, you just sort of step across the text and just generate it as you go, like a recurrent neural network would, as opposed to, taking all of the sections you need and then taking that internal structure and using that to generate the summary would be my guess here, based on what I know about headed formats and template-based summarization and generalization. Not entirely sure what faceted is. Looks like it might have come out pretty recently and I haven't run across it quite yet. So if you're interested, this is the citation for that. Oh, actually, let me pop the link to the paper in the chat as well, in case you would like to check it out. Oh, there we go. And so Normalize is saying, especially in linguistics and computer science, you have a lot of sort of words that are similar but mean different things. I've had discussions with linguists misusing the word transliteration for transcription many times. Yeah, also in sort of related fields, sometimes the same word will mean different things, which is a delight. Really great. Everybody loves that. Always a good time. It's not, I'm being sarcastic. All right, Falk and Gurevich, again, apologies if I mispronounce anyone's name, build concept maps, and Wu et al. 2020 make knowledge graphs. So these are graph structures for information. The difference between abstractive and extractive summarization is likely the best known distinction in output type, although it's not entirely clear which output factor best describes the difference. So abstractive is you sort of rewrite the text in a shorter way, and extractive is you select bits of the text and then place them together. In section 5, we use the context factors to identify future research discussions based on the difference between our finding and the related work. So I think something that is really helpful to take away from this section here, and just sort of in general, is that a lot of times, especially if you're new to a task and you sort of approach it, it's very easy to be like, well, of course this is the way that you would do it. It seems like the only way that you would do it to me, as someone who hasn't really read a lot about the approach or different things about it, or maybe has never worked with language data before. But no matter what you do, you are making a lot of decisions, right? So you are picking a lot of things when you build a system, and if you're doing that not in discussion with the wider field, you may not realize that some of the decisions that you are making are decisions other people have made or have not made for specific reasons, and you may not understand how your work fits in with the work as a larger whole. And sometimes that's fine, right? If you're just doing like a quick student project, no reason, unless you've been asked to go through and do like an exhaustive literature review to understand how your work fits in with other people's work. But particularly if you're interested in research, or if you're just getting started, I think, this discussion here makes it really clear that there are a lot of decisions that people are making, that they may not always understand our decisions and just seem like the natural or normal or reasonable thing to a specific person in a specific situation, but they may not seem like the natural or normal or reasonable thing to a different person, even in the same situation, or a different person in a different situation. So yeah, I've graded a fair amount of student work, and if you haven't done that, you may not realize that a lot of times there are sort of assumptions about, like, I'm just doing it the default way, when that is not the case. And also, in fact, there is no default way, right? There are a lot of decisions that are made all the way along the process. I think it's just a good example of that for this task that I'm not super familiar with. So, evaluation. Take a drink. Oh, I don't have my cough drops. That's okay. We're trucking. I think we should be fine. Hopefully I won't lose my voice. Evaluation for automatic summarization. Evaluation methods, there we go, I missed a word. For automatic summarization can be grouped into intrinsic and extrinsic methods. Intrinsic methods evaluate the model itself, e.g. on informativeness or fluency. Extrinsic methods target how a summary performs when used for a task. So intrinsic, inside, coming from inside, extrinsic, coming from the outside. So can I just do this by looking at my model, or do I have to consider my task in context? Intrinsic methods only really make sense in a research setting that's not applied. Almost all, industry work is going to be extrinsic methods are what you care about, right? Are users using this? Do they keep using it? Do you get a bunch of, bug reports or whatever? So you usually need to consider the situation into which a system will be deployed all the time in an industrial setting, and only kind of some of the time in a research setting. Extrinsic methods are resource intensive, explaining the popularity of intrinsic methods. A little bit of academic shade there. Basically, they're saying the reason that people do intrinsic methods is that it takes time and effort to do the extrinsic methods, and people don't want to, so they don't. And I get it, right? There's a pressure to publish a large volume of work, and less pressure to publish, a lot of really high quality, really well thought through work. But yep. All right. And I'm not entirely sure what that was in relation to normalized, but agreeing with something just because of the assumption that it's the right move even when clearly irrational. Yeah, I'm guessing that's the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic. Evaluation methods can also be grouped into automatic and human evaluation methods. Different automatic methods have been proposed, such as Rouge and Burt score, which respectively evaluate lexical and semantic similarity. So like how close are these in a, distributional semantic space. Other methods use an automatic question answering evaluation methodology. Move myself. Most human evaluation approaches evaluate intrinsic factors such as informativeness, readability, and conciseness, factors that are difficult to evaluate automatically. Yes, understatement. There are also some extrinsic human evaluation methods where judges are asked to perform a certain task based on the summary. So far, usefulness has not been evaluated in a feasible and comprehensive manner, whereas it is an important metric to evaluate whether summaries fulfill users' needs. Therefore, we bridge the gap by introducing a feasible and comprehensive evaluation methodology to evaluate usefulness. And I think if you were outside the field, I think if you'd never, worked in NLP research or, had never worked in academia, you would probably be appalled to read this, right? That we're measuring all these sorts of things all the time, but we don't ask whether or not the thing that we're doing is actually useful. And of course, this is for a particular task, this automatic text summarization. But if you're someone who's going to have to use these systems and isn't really involved in building them, you'd probably be like, what the heck? You mean you're not asking if I can use it? That seems like the most important thing to me as a user, which I would agree. But, if you're in the research field, then that makes a lot of sense, right? Oftentimes when you're building a research project, you're not building it to be put into production. You're not building it to hand to users. You are building it to tell other scholars that you've built it, and that's sort of as far as it goes. The number of research projects that are actually put into production is vanishingly small. I would guess sort of like of all papers published in 2022 in the ACL anthology, like maybe 5% of them are put into production, and in large part that's because a lot of them come from commercial labs, right? Like Microsoft is one of the authors on this paper is from Microsoft. There's a lot of Google papers and different commercial research labs. So the vast majority of research work that's done, users never see. It just sort of like changes what researchers are thinking about and working on and understand. And then eventually those changes will make their way into a system that does get used by users, but most systems don't. And in that case, well, no one's ever going to use your system, so how are you going to evaluate users, right? And I think what they're saying here is like, actually, if what you want to do is build something useful, you have to have users to know if they can use it. And that is a really big burden on researchers in terms of, I've had a number of illuminating discussions with, colleagues at different points in time who are in computer science departments about human subjects research and what you can and can't do and what it entails and, survey design and like all of that stuff, right? It is a separate skill set. And if you don't have anybody on your team or in your lab who knows it, it's a huge lift to learn. Or you could collaborate with someone who does have those skill sets, but often they are, can often be undervalued by computer science departments, let me put it that way. So anyway, let's look at this description of what usefulness here is. So from the English Oxford Learners Dictionary, the fact of being useful or possible to use, where useful is defined as that which can help you to do or achieve what you want. Yep. Normalize says, I have a lot to say about people's judgments based on how something is concise. Yeah. Unlike this video, which is not. All right. And now let's talk about a use case. Automatic summarization for education. Summaries play a prominent role in education. Reader? Question mark, and Anderson probably find that students who use a pre-made summary score better on a range of study activities than do students who do not use such a summary. As the quality of automatically generated summaries increases, so does the potential to use them in an educational domain, especially given the increasing importance of digital tools and devices for education, which, I mean, it's 2022. I think we are aware you can use computers in education, especially given recent events. With these developments in mind, it is critical that educators are aware of the pedagogical implications. They need to understand how to best make use of all new possibilities. The outcomes of our survey result in concrete suggestions for developing methods for automatic summarization in the educational domain, whilst taking student needs into account. So basically, they're just saying like, hey, summaries can be very, very helpful for students. You know, it helps them perform better on testing, which, well, I guess a range of study activities, right? So it's not just testing, which is good. So you have a more sort of like fully featured view of students. And I haven't read this paper, I should say. But yeah. CTACMO says survey methodology has its own PhD programs, although there's only a handful around the globe. Interacting with people who think that everybody can write a questionnaire is generally traumatic. I can see that, yes. I can definitely see that. Yeah, surveys are way harder than you think they are. Well, maybe not harder than CTACMO thinks they are. Normalize says, this video, I'm trying my best to get the meta of what you're saying, but your speed is definitely too much for me to digest. Apologies, I am a fast talker. I'm actually trying to talk slowly right now. I have been the whole video. But there should be automatic captions. It looks like they are working today. And these are always immediately available after the stream, so you can watch the replay. Some of you are probably watching on the replay. Hi. Yeah. Oh, good. I'm really glad you are enjoying enjoying the paper, AM. Normalize says, not that concise yet. I mean, that's why if you wanted the concise version, you would have read the paper. All right. And the thing about research papers is that they are concise because they're for a specialized audience. So a lot of things just aren't explained because they assume that you know it. And what I'm doing when I'm reading is I'm not assuming that you know it. So yes, there's a lot of exploding, but like in a, you know, zooming in sort of sense. I'm not blowing anything up. All right, let's get to the survey procedure. I know this is what you've been waiting for, CTACMO. Here, we detail our survey procedure. For concreteness, we present the details with our intended target group in mind. The context factors form the backbone of our survey, and the setup can be easily adjusted to investigate the needs of different target groups. Also, just as an aside, because I was thinking about it with regards to surveys, also visualization, especially, oh, thank you, Brett, real life jargon app. Visualization, right? Like most of you have made a graph at some point. I've also had a lot of like very illuminating discussions with people, even people who, you know, have been doing data science for a while, who don't realize that visualization and what makes a good visualization is a field in and of itself. And you can like search, you know, which are the most easy to understand types of visualizations for a specific type of format, right? Like, should I use, you know, something that has color or size or, you know, degree, like radians, as my visualization method? And there have been many papers written on it, and you can find a lot of useful information that will make your life easier. But yeah, I don't know, I guess you have to know that people are studying it first to be able to go and find the sweet fruits of that study. And you can just be like, I don't have to figure this out. I can take this thing that's already been studied, put it in my little harvesting basket, and you know, put it in my visualization or like my work recipe. I don't know. It's a food metaphor. It sort of broke down. Anyway. For example, we asked participants about a pre-made summary for a recent study activity, but it is straightforward to adapt this to a different use case that is more suitable for other user groups. Normalize says, I doubt the paper is more concise than your slow talk. Brett says, vector graphics versus bitmap. Yep. Important distinction, especially if you're putting things in papers or slides. AM says, my boss did his PhD in just visualization. Yeah, visualization research is just so cool. And if you make graphs, I would definitely recommend looking into it a little bit, because it'll change your life. It'll change your life. All right. So here is the study background on the participants, which I imagine we get to, but I like to read figures as we get to them. So we've got about 2/3 have a master's degree or are studying for a master's degree, and about 1/3 are studying for a bachelor's degree. And then for what they are studying, about roughly 1/5 is studying medical sciences, roughly 1/3 are studying social sciences, business, or the humanities, you know, those three very similar topics. And then a little over half are studying STEM. So that's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And if I had to guess, they're probably in the computer science department. Again, talking about populations of convenience. Woo! Participants. We recruited participants among students at universities across the Netherlands by contacting ongoing courses and student associations, and by advertisements on internal student websites. As incentive, we offered a €10 shopping voucher to 10 randomly selected participants. Okay. So if you finish the study, you got a chance at a voucher. A total of 118 participants started the survey, and 82 completed the full survey, resulting in a 69.5% completion rate. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Yeah, for surveys that I've done, like in an industrial setting, I would say like a, 5 to 20% completion rate is usually what I'm expecting. So apparently those vouchers were pretty enticing. We only include participants who completed the study in our analysis. Participants spent 10 minutes on average on the survey. In the final part of our survey, we asked participants to indicate their current level of education and main field of study, details given in Figure 2 that we already looked at. Figure 3 shows a brief overview of our study procedure. A detailed account is given in Appendix B. We arrived at the final survey version after a number of pilot runs where we ensured participants understood their task and all the questions. This is very important. You have to pilot surveys. You can't just put them out there and expect them to work. I cannot tell you that strongly enough. We ran the survey with SurveyMonkey. A verbatim copy is included in Appendix C and released under a CC BY license. Okay, so this would allow for commercial use and also for changing it and derivatives. The only thing you would need to do to use this is to say that it is by the authors of this paper, and I just cite the paper. I think that would probably be easiest. Alexi says, wow, shopping vouchers. I mean, they are students, right? I'm guessing that those are like gift cards. would be my guess, or what I would call them. I think that's probably just a difference in dialect. I think it's probably just a dialectal difference. Did it just take me a couple seconds to remember the word dialect? One of the main topics I studied in my PhD? Yes. Introduction. The survey starts with an introduction where we explain what to expect, how we process the data, and that participation is voluntary. Fabulous. After participants agree with this, an explanation of the term pre-made summary follows. As we do not want to bias participants by stating that the summary was automatically generated, we explain that the summary can be made by anyone, e.g. a student, a good performing fellow student, the authors of the original material, or a computer. Recall that an automatically generated summary is a pre-made summary. Hence, our survey identifies the characteristics an automatically generated summary should have. We also give examples of pre-made summaries. Based on the pilot experiments, we noticed that people missed this information. We explicitly state that these are just examples and that participants can come up with any example of a helpful pre-made summary. In the main part of our survey, we focus on the context factors. First, we ask participants whether they have made use of pre-made summary in one of their recent study activities. If so, we ask them to choose the study activity where summary was most useful. So I don't know how globally popular they are, but there's a like a series of publications, I guess. They're like very thin books. They're called Cliff Notes, and it's a very abridged version of usually like a book that you would read in an English class, right? So like the Cliff Notes version of Othello is like here's what happens in Othello, basically in a condensed way. I usually just read the original text, but that would be an example of like a pre-made summary. Normalize says definitely an alarming couple of seconds. Yeah, I think I've mentioned this before. I'm dyslexic, and I find reading and writing both particularly taxing. I don't know if you can tell. This is pretty hard for me in terms of just like using up brain energy. And also, just to like give y'all a little sneak piece of knowledge, I'm also working on writing something at the moment. So yes, the brain levels are low in general. CDACPO says, sociologists read 10 to 20 times more than STEM students. I was taking some socio classes in grad school, and they required 100 pages of reading every week, 20 pages across all other stat courses combined. I mean, to be fair, math reading in particular is much slower to do generally, at least in my experience. Because you have to like sort of like go through and like work out the equations and like get to the point where you can understand it in your brain. But yes, that has also been my experience, is that social science scholars are better at reading, or at least a lot more time to it. Great question. Dino says, do you consider services like mTurk to be an ethical approach to crowdsource evaluations? It's a good question. I think there are sort of two components there. So one is it ethical? And I think it's possible to use crowdsourced services in an ethical way. I think it is difficult, right? Because they are sort of by their nature exploitative, because they are trying to find the cheapest possible labor to do something so that you don't have to do it in a place with, higher standards of wages and benefits and et cetera. I mean, I think, the thing that would make Mechanical Turk more ethical would be overall more social support everywhere on Earth, and I don't think that's a fair thing to ask for an individual for. But I think there's a second question here, which is, does it make sense to use Mechanical Turk for evaluations? And I would say in most cases, usually not, right? So I think this paper is a good sort of example of this. They are doing a specific task, and they have a specific set of users in mind. So the only people that can really give them information on whether or not they've achieved usefulness in their task are people from that group of users. And unless you are specifically developing something to be used by Mechanical Turk users, or a specific set of users who are available on Mechanical Turk, and you can ask about their experiences, then I think that often it's just not that useful. So if you remember we talked about it on the channel a while ago. I don't expect everybody to watch everything, but there was a recent Google data set with sort of like labeled emotions in tweets, and the vast majority of those emotions, not the vast majority, I think about 30% based on an outside analysis, were mislabeled because the labelers were outside of the target population of the people who made the tweets, or who were expected to read the tweets by the people who made the tweets in the first place, if that makes sense. So you have, yes, there's the ethical thing, like, are you being exploitative? And I think, I can imagine Mechanical Turk studies that are fine and I would get behind. But then there's the second question, which is, are data pick whichever one you like better, from those users going to actually be useful to you in your work? And I think that often the answer is just no, and you will end up wasting your money and their time, and probably not the best choice often. Yeah. Normalize says, if you have dyslexia, I'm a computer-generated speech system. I promise I do. I mask it pretty well and have spent a lot of time working on it, but yep. Alexi says, our data is produced by struggling people. Yep. Brett, yeah, this is fine example. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah. We call this group, so this is the group where they ask them to choose a study activity. We call this group the remembered group, as they describe an existing summary from memory. If people indicate that they have not used a pre-made summary in one of their recent study activities, we ask them whether they can imagine a situation where a pre-made summary would have been helpful. If not, we ask them why not, and lead them to the final background questions and closing page. If yes, we ask them to keep the imaginary summary in mind for the rest of the survey. We call this the imagined group. Now, so that would be me, right? Well, in as much as literature reviews or summaries, then yes, I have used lots of summaries in my work. Thank you, Normalized. It's a lot of work. Also, keep in mind, I have a research degree, so I have spent... Sorry, that was me trying to do the math of how much time in my life I've spent reading research papers, and it is hundreds, if not thousands of hours. So this is a domain I'm pretty comfortable in. Also, I'm in my native language, which is another huge boon that I know that not everybody has. Now we ask the remembered and imagined groups about the input, purpose, and output factors of the summary that they have in mind. We ask questions for each of these context factor subclasses that we discussed in section 2. At this point, the two groups are in different branches of the survey. Oh, this is a complex design. The difference is mainly linguistically motivated. In the imagined group, we use verbs of probability instead of asking to describe an existing situation. Verbs of probability instead of asking to describe an existing situation. Some questions can only be asked in the remembered group, e.g. how helpful the summary was. In the first context factor question, we ask what the study materials consisted of. We give a number of options as well as another checkbox. To avoid position bias, all answer options for multiple choice and multiple response questions in the survey are randomized, with the other checked box always the last option. So position bias is that people are more I know I've read this. I feel a little bit self-conscious because I know CTACMO definitely knows this off the top of their head. But I'm pretty sure that there is a bias towards the middle positions unless things are numeric, and then they're sort of like, well, I think that's also cultural, because in the US, there's a strong positive bias in numeric responses. So you're going to get like a lot of 5s on a 5-point scale. Because a 5-point scale in a lot of settings means was adequate. And anything less than that means I want you to be fired. So we have like a strong social pressure there to always answer 5 out of 5. CTACMO, let me know if you know off the top of your head what the usual position biases in multiple choice questions. And again, I think that might be cultural as well. If participants do not choose the mainly text option, we tell them that we focus on the textual input in the current study. Different modalities are also important to investigate, but we leave this for future work to ensure the clarity of our results. Oh, so I guess this would be something like, that's a footnote. So I guess that would be something like those YouTube channels that summarize papers. And then ask whether they can think of a situation where the input did consist of text, or like, I think there's some like podcasts as well that summarize papers. That would be a non-text modality. Normalize says, this isn't my native language, but the bias is to be neutral. So I get what you're setting here. If not, we lead them to the background questions and closing page. If yes, they proceed to the questions that give us a full overview of the input, purpose, and output factors of the situation participants had in mind. Finally, we ask the remembered group to suggest how their described summary could be turned into their ideal summary. Oh, that's a good question. We then ask both groups for any final remarks about their summary or input material. So intro, and then splitting into the people who had an example that they were remembering or were just sort of imagining one, and then future features, and then closing. I'm not entirely sure. Oh, we haven't gotten there. I was like, I don't know what these future features are yet. CTACMO says randomization for nominal categories is good. Nominal categories would be like, which of these pets have you had? Cat, dog, hamster. So they can't be ordered. Whereas a question like, how many pets have you had? 2, 3, 4, 5 would be ordered. That would not be a nominal category. There are primacy and recency biases, though, and yes, Dutch students may be respondingly differently than American students. We use a lot of Likert, L-I-K-E-R-T, Likert scales in linguistics. So that's most of what I know about. And then I often would design my experimental tasks. Sorry. little tangent here. Experimental task design was one of my like special interests. Actually, in undergrad, it was something I was really interested in, were the effects of study questions on linguistic responses. And it was something that so like, what are the fine grain acoustic differences between speech that is being read, that is being, read from a paragraph, read from a list, that is being, naturally had during conversation, that's just like one person talking to themselves, so all those sort of things. Like, how does that affect the fine grain acoustic measures of the speech data that is produced? And that was one of my research areas in grad school. I had a paper about it actually at the Acoustic Society of America, or maybe it was one of the ones that was joint with the Acoustic Society of Japan as well. Anyway, something that I was very interested in, and you can really affect the information that people give you by how you ask the questions. Yeah. Alexi says, delivery apps' obsession with star ratings is ruining lives in South Korea's restaurant trade. Consumer feedback has become an exception. 4.6 is unacceptable. 5 seems fake. The sweet spot is 4.9. Yeah. Yeah, talking about perverse incentives, right? You want people to, right? If you're a restaurant app, you want people to order food and have a good experience. But, if the only way that you are judging that is based on star ratings, then that's going to change what that experience is like, both for the restaurants and the people who are giving and the people who are receiving the ratings. But yep. Titacmo says, I suspect there's a slight expectation that the response options are ordered alphabetically or in some other meaningful order. So there's extra processing in the respondent's brain if they are not. Oh, interesting. I don't assume I don't generally assume that nominal categories are ordered in some way. I sort of always assume that they're randomized, but maybe that's just because I've written a lot of surveys. Oh, Alexi says that's from Rest of the World. Yeah, Rest of the World is a great news source. We talk about it all the time. Yeah. Alexi says the fourth option normalized. The fourth option obviously unusual due to having a color property. Oh, so giving examples of nominal variables. Yeah. Trustworthiness. So far, we have included the possibility that the summary was machine generated, but also explicitly included other options so as not to bias participants. At this point, we acknowledge that machine generated summaries could give rise to additional challenges and opportunities. Hence, we include some exploratory questions to get an understanding of the trust users would have in machine generated summaries and to get ideas for the interpretation of the context factors in an exploratory setting. And I think this in particular is very relevant given the makeup of their participants. So about half of their participants are currently studying STEM, right? So science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and probably have favorable feelings towards those fields. And the other half are studying medicine or social science, business and humanities, and may, have different feelings because it's not something that they work on, right? For the first questions, we tell participants to imagine that the summary was made by a computer, but contained all needs identified in the first part of the survey. We then ask them about trust in computer and human-generated summaries. Next, we ask them to imagine that they could interact with a computer program that made all summaries in the form of a digital assistant, so like a conversational interface. We then tell them not to feel restricted by the capabilities of today's digital assistants. The verbatim text is given in Appendix C. We ask participants to select the 3 most and 3 least useful features for digital assistants, similar to Hoeve et al. 2020. And I'm pretty sure this is the first or third author. Yeah, okay, so I'm pretty sure that's the first author. So it looks like this sort of like general questions about systems and their utility is sort of a research program of this author. Results. Yay! For each question, we examine the outcomes of all respondents together and of different subgroups, table 1. So I imagine that's pulling them apart by like major. For space and clarity reasons, we present the results of all respondents together unless interesting differences between groups are found. Okay, I'm not going to go to the appendices unless they tell us to. We use the question formulations as used for the remembered group and abbreviated answer options. Answers to multiple questions and multiple response questions are presented in an aggregated manner, and we ensure that none of the open answers answers can be used to identify individual participants. All right, so looks like they're doing some sort of, I'm guessing that they probably just read through these and made sure that they weren't de-identifiable. And this, it sounds like they're probably doing some sort of K-anonymization is the word I was looking for. There's like a different bunch. There's a bunch of different anonymization guarantees that you can give given a specific data set, and it sounds like they are making one of those guarantees but not going into it significantly. Yeah. I've already forgotten what the paper was about. So it's about what makes a summarization useful to, in this case, students. And they have sort of a broad survey that you can use in your own work to figure out what would make a summarization useful to a different group of users in a different situation. Robbie says, how useful is reading research papers? It depends. So in this case, I think the main utility of this paper is it has a review of relevant work. It's from this year, so it includes a lot of recent work. And also it has this survey instrument, which might be useful to some of you in your work. And finally, it has a way of approaching questions that I think is particularly useful in an industrial setting when you're trying to build something that people will use. If you are a researcher, you'd probably only read this if your work was directly related to this work. But I know a lot of us working in tech have a need to do NLP research, have a need to build NLP systems. And I think this is helpful if you're working in automatic summarization. And you could also maybe like adjust the research survey instrument to be helpful for some other situations as well. So yeah. Oh, interesting. So Sitako says, Jerry Timbrook, Jerry-Timbrook, dissertation was NLP of scripts of interactions of interviewers and survey respondents, quality control of survey data collection protocols. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, that could be interesting for some of you who are doing things like Mechanical Turk data collection. Yeah. Normalize says, a week ago, I just say this is a crazy, fast-talking genius, stutterless perfection. Well, thank you. I'm one of those things, and it's fast-talking. Yeah, no, I know what you mean, normalized. Yeah, all right. Identifying branches. Of our participants, about 80% were led to the remembered, and of the remaining 22%, 78% were led to the imagined. So this tells me that about 4 in 10, no, 8 in 10, 80%, roughly 80% of their respondents had used summarized text previously, or like, I think they had like a time bound on it. It was like in the last week or last month or something, had used summarized text recently, which I like, if I were developing a product, I'd be like, great, there's our user base right there. People want this, people are using this. If we can make it good and that they like using it, maybe they'll use our product. So that's great, right? If I were doing, market research and I was like 78% of people surveyed have used a similar product in the past week, we can maybe make it better. I think that would be a great pitch for business. Sorry, I have a one of my colleagues in grad school was a Russian language linguist, and whenever she said business, she said it like that, and I just picked it up and do it unintentionally, so apologies if that was inappropriate. Anyway, we asked the few remaining participants why they could not think of a case where a pre-made summary could be useful for them. People answered that they would not trust such a summary, and that making a summary themselves helped with their study activities. Okay, so basically like summaries were still useful for them, but they wanted to make it themselves. Table 1, levels of investigation. We did not find significant differences for each, but added all for completeness. So all respondents together, remembered versus imagined, different study fields, different study levels, different levels of how helpful the summary was according to the participants, weighted on a 5-point Likert scale. Note that only the remembered group answered this question. So, how helpful was this for you? Extremely helpful, extremely unhelpful, and like a 3 would be like neutral, neither help nor hurt. Yeah. Sitako says, Jerry is referred to in that tweet I posted, which has to do with the pronunciation of Likert. If I said it wrong, apologies. All right, figure 4 shows the input factor results. We haven't looked at that yet. We highlighted some here. Textual input is significantly more popular than other input types. That makes sense. Stressing the relevance of automatic text summarization. People describe a diverse input for scale and unit. So unit was, scale is how long it is, and unit is how many pieces of text were summarized, I believe. Much more than the classical focus of automatic summarization suggests. Most input had a considerable amount of structure. Structure is often discarded in automatic summarization, although it can be very informative. So things like research papers tend to be pretty structured, right? You can see all these, oh, you can't see my mouse. You've got all these like different headings and subheadings, etc. Or like scripts tend to be very structured. Person A says X, person Y says Z, stage directions, stuff like that. No. I do know IPA, the International Phonetic Alphabet, so if you can help me say it right, I would appreciate it. Although you did know what I meant, so for linguist purposes, that's good. All right, so I just want to go down and talk to figure 4. See figure 4. All right, so scooch myself a little bit. There we go. We've got A here, medium. The study material consisted of 74% said mainly text, and the other options were mainly figures, mainly videos, mainly audio, and a combination, and then don't know others. So about 20% said combination. Oh, combination of what, I wonder? I wonder if that's video and audio, like this, right? Like it's a video, but also somebody is talking, potentially? Oh, what was the length of the study material? So single article was only 5%. Single book chapter was 0%. Yeah, so those tend to be the sort of things that people do automatic summarization of. Whereas multiple articles was 10%, multiple chapters of the same book was 20%, multiple chapters from various books was 10%, and then a combination was about half, so 43%. What was the genre of the study material? So 60% educational, roughly, I'm rounding here, and about 40% scientific. Nobody had any fiction summarization needs. Again, these are students, so for different subpopulations, you may have different needs. D, the difficulty of this study material was specialized, almost everybody, so 86%, ordinary 12%, and then geographically based 1.4%. And then how was the study material structured? So none would be 6%. Sorry, that was my dog. I don't know if you heard something go, that was him. Had a title or titles, 50%, and this I think is a multiple selection, so you could have multiples. Alexi says, I cannot even describe the color they are using for the graphs. So I would, I'm gonna look something up really quick. I think I would describe this as, yeah, so there's a color that's often used to paint scenery to make it easy to ignore, that I've heard referred to as no-see-um green, and that is how I would describe the bar color. Contrast could be higher. I would definitely agree. And then, so that's my feedback to the authors. maybe slightly more contrast in these figures. And how are the study materials structured? So over half had titles, over half had subheadings. So a subheading is like this thing that says that says output factors. 60% had chapters. This doesn't have chapters, but you know what chapters are. 80% had sections and or paragraphs. So that's as opposed to taking everything and just putting it into a single long sequence. And usually you'd remove something like /p/t/n, those line break characters. So, but turns out actually humans like line breaks and it makes it easier to read text, and they're included. Yeah. Yeah. So let's go back up to where they are talking about it. Yeah, so basically what they're saying is like, hey, we're assuming, you know, completely unstructured input from a single short document that we're trying to make even shorter, and turns out that's not actually the needs of students. They are doing other things than what people generally do. Also, yes. Oh, sorry, I'm slightly off screen there. Structure is often discarded in automatic summarization, although it can be very informative. Yes, this is one of my big pet peeves, is when people just remove information during text cleaning and preparation. So like removing punctuation. There's information in the punctuation. Somebody put it in there for a reason. It's not random. Like there is. Sorry, ooh, I'm getting excited. Or like capitalization. Capitalization is informative. It means something. Repetition of characters. Somebody did that for a reason, right? And like, sure, maybe the reason is the cat fell asleep on their keyboard, but probably not, right? Don't just remove information because it's inconvenient for you. It's still important, and it may be the difference between building something useful and building something not useful. And I say this from memory. Normalize says, definitely for me, nothing beats a good old /n/t. Yep. And then purpose factors. So figure 5 shows the purpose factor results. So these were the input factors, if you remember the qualities of the input text. Purpose factors are why people did it. And also I'm on top of it. Yep. I've just put myself someplace random. Participants identified that the summary was helpful or very helpful, which allowed us to draw valid conclusions from the survey. Because we did not find significant differences in the overall results when we exclude the few participants who did not find their summary helpful, and we do not find many correlations with regard to how helpful a summary was and a particular context factor, we include all participants in the analysis, regardless of how helpful they found their summary, for completeness. Okay, and also I imagine statistical power. So basically they're like, we didn't see a huge difference when we did or didn't include them, so we just kept them. And just where was footnote 4? This is based on people's initial responses and not on the follow-up question they selected, if they selected another option than text. Okay, so this is just because if they said that it wasn't text, then the survey was like, okay, can you imagine a text one? Because that's what we're more interested in. But they found that even without that prompting, most people said that they had text that was summarized. AM says green, it's called green. Yeah, but like, there's lots of types of green, right? It could be forest green, it could be Kelly green, it could be emerald, it could be neon green. What's that? Chartreuse? Chartreuse is green, right? It could be many different types of green. Like I think this green here, this sort of like, oh, I'm directly on top of it. Even this like slightly darker, I don't know, frosted evergreen, that's what I'm going to call it, would be a little bit more helpful. Or like any of these blues or greens, like this teal here, there, that teal there, would also I think have been a little bit easier to see. We now highlight some results from the other questions in this category. For the intended audience of summaries, students selected levels 4 and 5. A lot or full domain knowledge is expected from users of the summary. So if you're summarizing something for class, people are probably going to expect that you know it after reading it. For the intended audience of the summary, students selected level 4 and 5. I said that, significantly more than the other options. Although perhaps unsurprising given our target group, it is an important outcome that requires a different level of detail than, for example, a brief overview of a news article. People use the summaries for many different use cases, whereas current research on automatic summarization mainly focuses on giving an overview of the input. Looks like a mismatch. We show the results for the remembered versus imagined splits, as the imagined group chose refresh memory and overview more often than the remembered group. Interesting. Oh, they are doing statistics. Interesting. Okay, so for people who are actually using summaries, they are less often using it for refreshing their memory or overviewing it than people who are just sort of imagining using summaries. That is interesting. Although not significant after a Bonferroni correction. Well, okay, you can't report it then. This can still be insightful for future research directions. Ignore this bit. Lastly, participants in the imagined group ticked more boxes than participants in the remembered group, 3 versus 2.5, 3 1/3 versus 2.5 per participant on average, stressing the importance of considering many different use cases for automatically generated summaries. How many participants did they have again? It was 118. That's a pretty big size. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, not good color choices, particularly because they're at the same intensity. Yep. Am says, it's cool that color selection is the foremost critique of the paper so far. Yeah. I mean, again, a little peek behind the curtain. I don't generally pick papers that I think are going to be bad. I'm not especially interested in being out here just dunking on people for the hell of it. I try to pick papers that I think I will enjoy reading and you all will get something from. So. But yeah, so far I've been really impressed by this paper. If I were a reviewer, I probably would have been like, take that out. just don't talk about it at all. All right. Figure 6 shows result for the output factor questions. Let's go find figure 5 first, actually, so we can talk about it while it's fresh in the mind. Oh, wait. Here. There we go. I think that's fine. Okay, so situation 1, what was the main goal of the study activity? Wow, absolutely huge here. 83% say they were studying for an exam. So this is really for understanding the material. Who made the summary? Mostly other students. Interesting. Okay, so like sharing notes back and forth, I'm guessing, to, you know, help review the material faster or learn the material for the first time faster. My general impression of secondary education or post-secondary education in Europe is that it tends to be much more exam focused than in the US. And in the US, you tend to have fewer smaller assignments, particularly like the master's level, rather than like one super big one. Whereas I get the impression that in Europe, it's a little bit more common to have one big exam at the end of the quarter or the semester or whatever it is, and then that's what your grade is. So, yeah. The summary was made specifically to help me and my fellow students with study activities. So it's about strongly agree about half, agree 24%, and then sort of like lower after that. Yeah. A little more like Audible than a paper right now. Yeah, I guess you could listen to this as a podcast if you liked. Yeah. Yeah, sorry, normalized. I am a fast talker, and I am, again, trying to talk slowly right now. For what type of people was the summary intended? Untargeted to targeted. I don't know what that question is asking. How did the summary help you with your task? So for people who are just imagining a summary, they said that it was very helpful for refreshing their memory or an overview. For people who are remembering a summary, they said that it was, the only thing they said more than the imagined people was that it was a substitute. So these are maybe some students who are not doing the reading, but still want the information, which, you know, like I said, I have an English degree, an English literature degree, as well as a linguistics degree. So I understand what it's like to be overwhelmed by reading. Yeah, interesting. So for those who are remembering actually reading a summary, overview was the most common thing, followed by refreshing memory, followed by understanding, followed by substitute, followed by retrieval, followed by preview. Nobody reads ahead. And then reminder and other as the last two. And then overall, how helpful was the pre-made summary for you? Pretty helpful, it looks like. So, you know, 70-80% of respondents said a 4 or 5 on how helpful it was. So interesting. And then The output factors. Figure 6 shows the results for the output factor questions. Textual summaries were significantly more popular than any other summary type, which again stresses the importance of automatic text summarization. Most participants indicated that the summary covered or should cover most of the input material. For the output factor style, we found an interesting difference between the remembered and imagined group, whereas the remembered group described significantly more often an informative summary. The imagined group opted significantly more often for a critical or aggregative summary. Most research on automatic summarization focuses, I think that's right, on informative summaries only. For the output factor structure, people described a substantially richer format than the pre-made summaries than adopted in most research on automatic summarization. So basically what this is saying is like, you know, a lot of what students are actually looking for or imagining is not super well, you know, represented by the current research is basically what this section is saying. Instead of simply running text, the vast majority of people indicated that the summary contained or should contain structural elements such as special formatting, diagrams, headings, etc. Yes, if this paper were presented to me as a single flat text file with no subheadings, no line breaks, no like bolding, no figures, I would not read it. You could hand it to me and I'd be like, absolutely not. Leave. So yes, this also is similar to my experience. Moreover, the imagined groups ticked more answer boxes on average than the remembered groups, indicating a desire for structure in the generated summaries, which is supported by the open answer questions. All right, let's check out figure 6B. I think we're getting quite close to the end. Yeah, I just have a couple more pages. Oh, nice, don't have to move myself over. So the format of the summary, most often abstractive text, and then lecture notes, which are a form of summarization, and then highlights were tied. How is the summary structured? So for the remembered, running text with highlights, special formatting, diagrams, tables, graphs, figures, headings, sections, sections/paragraphs, and others. So for the imagined students, they imagined it having paragraphs and headings, diagrams, tables, and graphs far more than the remembered students. And the remembered students remember having running text and highlights more than the imagined students. But basically, they all want breaks in the text and special formatting. How much of the material was covered by the summary? Most of them said most. And then what was the style of the summary? 90% said informative. And for those who are just like imagining a summary, they said about 50% informative, 30% aggregative, and 10% critical, which none of the remembered summaries are. So I think, you know, I would agree with the authors. It seems like there's a desire for something that we're kind of not there yet with as a field for, you know, summaries that don't just like pull together text, don't just summarize a single text, but pull together multiple texts and provide additional information. So, interesting. All right, open answers. We asked participants in the remembered group how the summary could be transformed into their ideal summary, and 86% of these participants made suggestions. Oh, that's a great response rate on an open-ended text question too. You've got some helpful students here. Many of those included adding additional structural elements to the summary, like figures, tables, or structure in the summary text itself. Y'all heard it. This is the big new research direction, I hope, in automatic summarization. Add in figures. For example, one of the participants wrote, an ideal summary is good enough to fully replace the original text contained in articles that need to be read for exams. The main purpose behind this is speed of learning from my experience. More tables, graphs, and visual representations of the study material and key concepts / links would improve the summary, as I would faster comprehend the study material. And just to be clear, generally when people are presenting their research work at conferences, they will often include slides that have additional figures in them and don't have this wall of text, right? It's just like pulling out the most relevant things. Another participant wrote, colors and a key for color coding, different sections such as directions, definitions on the left maybe, and then the rest of the page reflects the structure of the course material with notes on the readings that have many headings and subheadings. Yeah, so visual organization of the information to help get it faster. Another theme is the desire to have more examples in the summary. One participant wrote, more examples, I think. For me personally, I need examples to understand the material. Now I needed to imagine them myself. So one of the things the summarization was doing was removing the examples, which will make it shorter, but it sounds like in this case made it less helpful. Some participants wrote that they would like a more personalized summary. So personalized summarization, one of the tasks that the authors mentioned earlier. Actually, give me just a second. I will be right back. And I'm back. Did you miss me? Sorry, that should help with the background noise. I don't know if y'all were picking it up, but I was. More personalized summary. I'd highlight some things I find difficult, so I'd personalize the summary more. Another participant wrote, make it more personalized maybe. These notes were by another student. I might have focused more on some parts and less on others. Yeah, so sort of what people would like in the generated summaries: structure, pictures, examples, things that make it easier to learn from the text, which I think is a great direction for research, challenging, interesting. Also, I feel I am trying to remember the last time I read an ACL paper that had direct quotes from the people who might use the system in it, and it's not coming to me off the top of my head. We talked about in the coffee chat last week a sociology paper on smart homes that did include some quotes from research participants, but that wasn't an ACL paper. So yeah, I don't know. Sometimes something that frustrates me sometimes is that as a field, we're not always great at remembering that people are going to use these systems, right? It's human language technology. The H stands for humans, and you know, they are capable people who have thoughts and feelings and internal life, and sometimes it's not centered in our work. And I wish it were more often. And I think this paper does a good job of it. All right, trustworthiness and future features. Yeah, Norm says full replacement isn't always doable, but adding the information in visual ways as a replacement for text is very useful. Yeah, and can be a great way to summarize text as well, which condense is the word I was looking for, but yeah, summarize as well. AM says, I reckon this is educational enough to be billed as company hours, right? Yeah, it's training. I'm training. Yeah, absolutely. I would say this is training. I've directly linked this to commercial applications multiple times in the discussion. So yeah. Discussion about the graph. The main thing when interacting with someone imagined is them feeling threatened really fast for some reason, as if I'm trying to fail them. Oh, weird. Yeah. And then trustworthiness and future features. Of all participants, oh wait, one sec. Sorry, I just realized I haven't been looking at the Twitch chat. Chrono Zero, hello, I'm so sorry. I just realized that it was not visible. 48% indicated that it would not make a difference to them whether a summary is machine or human generated. Oh, interesting. So that's, 80% of them would use it. 48% of them say it wouldn't matter if it were automatically generated. So again, I think there's a real market for this, just again, talking from a commercial angle. As long as the quality is as good as a human generated one, gotta be good. You gotta have figures, gotta be visually appealing, has to be correct, has to include at least some examples. This last point is reflected in which types of summaries participants would trust more. People opted significantly more often for a human-generated one. For future feature questions, adding more details to the summary and answering questions based on the content of the summary were very popular. We give a full account in Appendix D. Yeah. Am I also on Twitch? I am also on Twitch. I stream on both. But the Twitch videos now disappear pretty much immediately, or like a week after you stream them or something. So yeah, I consider YouTube to be the main platform that I use, but I do also use Twitch. And it's the same RCTATMAN. Oh yeah, it's in my coffee link as well. All right. Implications applications and perspectives. So 5.1, future research directions. Our findings have important implications for the design and development of future automatic summarization methods. We present these in Table 2 per context factor. Summarizing, the research developments as summarized in Section 2 are encouraging, yet given that automatic summarization methods increasingly mediate people's lives, we argue that more attention should be devoted to its stakeholders, i.e. to the purpose factors. Oh, I zoomed out at some point. Here we have shown that students, an important stakeholder group, have different expectations of pre-made summaries than what most automatic summarization methods offer. And I think this is a key point and a problem in the field, right? That a lot of technology that gets built, human language technology that gets built, is not solving the problem that users have. And I saw this all the time when I was working on chatbots, right? Like companies would be like, I want to build a chatbot to have a chatbot. And I was like, great. Do your users actually want it? Because otherwise you are going to spend a lot of time and money and effort building something that no one's going to use because it doesn't help them. And I think this is just, we're in a point in the field where people are very excited by it. There's a lot of new methods. There's a lot of hype. There's a lot of sort of public discussion around it. But if it's not actually helping users, it doesn't matter. People aren't going to use it. They're not going to like it. And they're going to lose trust in, human language technology as a whole. So yeah, super important. Very important to think about. Yeah. All right. Oh, Dano says, that makes sense. I'm always confused when you read comments I don't see in YouTube. Yep. I try to keep up with both of them. These differences include the type of input material that is to be summarized and also how these summaries are presented. Presumably, this also holds for other stakeholder groups, and thus we hope to see our survey used for different target groups in the future. So the authors would be delighted if you used their survey. And then input factors, like specifically, this is what students want. Handle a wide variety and mixture of different types of input documents at once, right? So like, I can imagine summarizing all of my coffee chat YouTube videos. That would be great. I would use that. Understand the relationships between different input documents and use the structure of the input documents, right? So this is, much harder to handle as just like a flat sequence to sequence text in, text out project, but would be much more useful to users. Purpose features explicitly defined a standpoint on the purpose factors in each research project. Like, I am choosing to do this, I am choosing to do this, instead of just like, well, I made these decisions and that seems obvious to me in my current situation. Include a comprehensive evaluation methodology to evaluate useful. We propose this in section 5.2, which we have not gotten to yet. And explicitly model and understand relationships between different elements in the summary and potentially relate this back to the input documents. I skipped a section. And output different summary styles, e.g. informative, aggregative, or critical. Especially the last two require a deeper understanding of the input materials than current models have. Yep. So basically I would say, these are the future directions that the authors recommend. And I think they'd say, I don't think I'm putting words in their mouth, that the current work on automatic summarization is not mostly focused on the specific things that students, this particular stakeholder group, would find the most useful. Not that there aren't people working on them, but that we're just not there yet with the models that are doing this. And in order to make models that are actually useful for students in this case, or other stakeholder groups, once the survey instrument is more widely used across them, you would, have people who like to use the thing you built, which, I don't know, that's always my goal when I build something. Em says, regarding structure as information to preserve, you mentioned earlier punctuation and capitalization. Can you think of other examples? So I wouldn't necessarily call those structure. I would call those sublexical sublexical features is usually how I categorize those two together. So for structure, it would be something like paragraphs, headings, chapters, figures, that sort of thing, is usually what they mean in this example. The punctuation and capitalization were my personal examples of other types of information that are often removed. Yeah, sorry, just to be clear, that's not something the authors were saying. Yep. And data sets, another thing that is hard and expensive to build. To support these future directions, we need to expand efforts on using and collecting a wide variety of data sets. Yeah, especially these like multimodal, multi-document, aggregative, critical summaries. You're gonna need pretty challenging to put together a data set for that. And then also to have, I don't know if they have gold examples. I know they have gold examples in machine translation where like a human does it. I don't know if that's as common in summarization, but given that they are talking about Rouge scores earlier in the paper, I would imagine it is. But yeah, that is several PhDs of work right there. Yes, our findings also impact the evaluation of summarization methods. We talk about this next. So this is the last page. Following Spark Jones and Mani, we argue that a good choice of context factors is crucial in producing useful summaries. One sec. Oh, there it goes. I'm out of water. That's okay. We're almost done. It is important to explicitly evaluate this. The few existing methods to evaluate usefulness are very resource demanding or not comprehensive enough. I'm not familiar with either of these methods. Thus, we propose a feasible and comprehensive method to evaluate usefulness. This was the third contribution. For the evaluation methodology, we again use the context factors. Before the design and development of the summarization method, the intended purpose factors need to be defined, especially the fine-grained factor use is important here. Why are you building this? Who would use it? And if it's nobody, like, I don't know. I find that very draining to be working on something that no one will ever use, and that's the intended purpose, but I guess some people like it. Next, the output factors need to be evaluated on the use factors. For this, we take inspiration from research on simulated work tasks. Evaluators should be given a specific task to imagine, e.g. writing a news article or studying for an exam. This task should be relatable to the evaluators so that a reliable answer can be obtained. So like I said, if you're doing Mechanical Turk and you're like, imagine you're studying for your PhD thesis presentation and nobody who you're asking it from has ever had to do that, or maybe nobody in their close social circle has ever had to do that, that's not relatable. They're not going to give you good data. With this task in mind, evaluators should be asked to judge two summaries in a pairwise manner on their usefulness in the following format. The output factor of which of these two summaries is most useful to use factor. For example, the style of which of these two summaries, you would definitely need to define style in this context, is most useful to you to substitute a chapter that you need to learn for your exam preparation. It is crucial to ensure the judges understand, there we go, the meaning of each of the evaluation criteria, style, and substitute in this example. Good question. Good question. Good point. It's also the point that I made. Also, when you're reading a paper and they do that, it feels really good as a reader. And also, like, again, if you're reviewing it and you're like, I've got a question, and they immediately answer the question, you're like, you did a good job. Okay, good writing. 10 out of 10. We provide example questions for each of the use and output factors in Appendix E. Okay, so this is a human evaluation, and it's not just like Rouge score or something. It's like, hey, imagine you are doing this task that you are familiar with. How helpful is which of these summaries is better for a given topic on a given task? And I really like that sort of forced choice design where you have to pick one of two. It's much quicker to do as a respondent than a lot of other types of surveys, even if you're reading two things. Yeah, I mean, that's the main thing. It's much quicker, and it's also easier, right? Like, which of these two is better is a much easier question to answer than like rank these 14 things on how good they are for various things. I hate ranking tasks. When I come across them in a survey, I usually just quit. Not always, but if I was doing the survey as like a favor to somebody, I'll be like, how much do I like you? You making me check all these check boxes. I don't like it. Anyway, yeah, so I think that's fairly reasonable. And yeah, it's human evaluation, but again, in the sort of text generation space right now, human evaluation is the gold standard. It is the best way of measuring these systems. And like, to be frank, if you're putting your systems in front of people, you should have humans evaluate them. So I think that's a very reasonable method. Yeah. Am says paragraphs, heading, chapters, so talking about structure, mostly line breaks or how the input is sort of segmented. Yeah, or if it has like relationships to each other. So like if you're on, you know, a web page and there's hyperlinks between stuff, the relationship of those hyperlinks to each other could also be a type of structure. But yeah, basically, what does it look like? Yeah. Norm says, so you're testing face expressions that are less positive and the lack of response to get as much info as the subject provides. So this evaluation does not have any sort of facial recognition in it or emotion detection, not a thing you can do. And also I would strongly recommend that you do not include that as an evaluation measure in any type of system. It's not reliable and also normalizes surveillance. So I just wouldn't do it. All right, conclusion. In this paper, we focused on users of automatically generated summaries and argue for stronger emphasis on their needs in the design, development, and evaluation of automatic summarization methods, which I can get behind 100%. User-centered, you know, everything. I'm a big fan of this approach, and I think this is a really super comprehensive way of being like, okay, how are people actually using this, or how would they use it if it was good enough for them to use it, right? We led by example and proposed a survey methodology to identify those needs. Our survey is deeply grounded in past works by Spark Jones. And that's the author who came up with all of these different fine-grained ways of thinking about text summarization, or factors to consider in text summarization, on context factors for automatic summarization, and can be reused to investigate a wide variety of users. So again, if you're working on something similar, I'd say feel free to use it. It's, I believe they said it was CC BY. So that license means you just have to attribute that they wrote the original survey when you use it. You can also use it for commercial applications. Which makes sense, because if they had, Microsoft wouldn't be able to use it for their stuff. In this work, we use our survey to investigate the needs of university students, an important target group of automatically generated summaries. We find that the needs identified by our participants are not fully supported by current automatic summarization methods, and we propose future research directions to accommodate those needs. So I think this is great, right? Actual genuine user needs being used to determine what the most reasonable next research steps are. I love that as an approach, as opposed to sort of the current approach that a lot of people take, which is what sounds coolest. Which, I mean, if that's what's motivating you to do research, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but I don't think everyone in the field should be doing that, or we will end up with, you know, not super helpful research. Finally, we proposed an evaluation methodology to evaluate the usefulness of automatically generated summaries, which is have somebody imagine they're using this to do a task and ask them how easy it would be to do that task. Or, you know, how a certain factor would influence a certain type of use. Which of these two? Oh my God, okay. So the evaluation metric that they propose is that you give two summaries and you say, hey, evaluator, who is a human, if you are looking at these summaries, which factor of these two summaries is better for specific tests? And then they pick the better one. All right. So those are the main contributions. And then just really quickly, that's goal impact. With this work, we hope to take a step in the right direction to make research into automatic summarization more inclusive by explicitly taking the needs of these users of these summaries into account. As stressed throughout the paper, these needs are different per user group, and therefore it is critical that a wide variety of user groups be investigated. There may also be within group differences. For example, in this work, we have focused on students from universities in one country, but students attending universities in other geographical locations, along with different cultures, might express different needs. It is important to take these considerations into account to limit the risk of overfitting on a particular user group and potentially harming other user groups. Yeah, great point. That was one thing I was going to bring up, but they already did it. So in psychology, there's this concept called WEIRD, which is white, educated, Western. I think the W stands for Western, actually, not white. Western, educated, industrialized, RD. One sec, I'm going to look it up. Where the idea is that this is the subset of people in the world. WEIRD participants in psychology. This is the subset of people in the world who have had the most psychology research done on them, and the experience of these groups of people are not universal. So if you were building a system for a particular group of people, you should figure out what they need and then give it to them. I'm trying to find, oh, here we go. So Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic is what the R&D stands for. So subset of the world, people from that subset are not going to be stand-ins for humanity as a whole, and we shouldn't treat them as such. But like, I think the authors are aware of that and clearly talked about it in the ethics section. So I didn't have to bring it up. I mean, I brought it up anyway, but I think they were aware of it. Yeah. So overall, if you're interested in the survey or using it in your own work, overview of the context factors, it's down here somewhere. Yeah, so starting on page 61, and I'll pop the link in just as well. Where can I open a PR? So unfortunately, because this is a published paper, you can't change it anymore. But I'll pop the link in there as well. And on page 61 is where the survey starts if you would like to use the survey yourself in your work. So, yeah. Interesting. I'm just reading Romai's comment. Changing your own face expressions and judging by comments. I mean, you can obviously smile, laugh, frown, or judge response frequency and engagement. Well, maybe. Definitely. Normalize says, I'm not part of that subset, by the way, if you're wondering. Yeah, most people aren't. And the sort of assumption that they are is, I would say, a pretty big problem in, social science and behavioral science in general, but also one that I think people are increasingly aware of, and we talk about similar stuff a lot on this channel, so hopefully something y'all are aware of as well. All right, so we've read the paper, and if you missed the first little bit, the paper is What Makes a Good and Useful Summary, Incorporating Users into Automatic Summarization Research. I think well-written paper. I certainly enjoyed reading it. I hope you all found it useful. Really good literature review. So if you're looking for recent citations in automatic summarization literature, good place to start and kick that off. Yeah, and some potentially helpful tools for those of y'all who are working in industry, which I think is most of you. I think most of you aren't researchers. So yeah. Oh, fabulous. AM says, I'm working on a summarization project targeting university students, so the stream has been gold for me. Thank you. You're very welcome. I'm really glad it's practical. All right, and before we head out, I just want to say thank you to all of my fabulous monthly supporters. I'm working on trying to make this my full-time job. I've got some stuff coming up that I will announce soon. Secrets. Yeah, so thank you to everyone who contributes to the channel. I appreciate you. Thank you. That's all I have to say there. And then we will be back on Thursday for our usual coffee chat, where we talk about research and news and basically stuff that's happened in the last week in natural language processing and machine learning and sort of just things that affect people working in tech like us. So thank you so much for joining today. I hope you had a good time and you learned a lot. And we will be back on Thursday for the coffee chat. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.